We said, we're done.
Mm.
We're going to take him home and we're going to figure it out. And I will say it was the best decision we ever made because he thrived when we got him home.
Hello, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney. Today I have episode 61 with Erica Ryan, co-creator with her husband, Sean, of the Extended Hospital Stay Notebook for Parents. So about a year ago when they released the notebook, she sent me a copy so I could review it and share it. And when I received that, I was floored with this resource that they had created from their experience. And I knew that I wanted to interview her and have her on the show at some point, and wanted to wait until the right season with the right theme. And here we are finally, almost a year later, in season 4, which works really well with this topic. Next week, I will share her special topic episode all about extended hospital stays. And this week, we get to hear her story episode all about the inspiration for the notebook. Her son, Westley. Wesley was affected by Down syndrome. Now, anyone who's been listening for a while knows that this is incredibly ironic, since that is the diagnosis I kind of secretly envy. Very illogically, Kimball was misdiagnosed with Down syndrome in the very beginning when I was still pregnant with him, and I was envious of the community that they seem to have, in contrast with a rare syndrome. And I talk about that in episode 53 with Kara Riska, all about diagnosis jealousy, which I'll put a link in the show notes for if you want to go listen to that. And Erica actually told me off the hook that she related with that episode because she's always felt kind of on the periphery of Down syndrome and the community because her son, Westley, because of her son's intense medical issues that apparently only 1% of the Down syndrome community usually experience. He has a few rare conditions piled onto his Down syndrome diagnosis, including a short gut. So she is one of us. Now, Wesley spent a total of 534 days, that's 18 months, in the hospital in his 3 years of life. He sadly passed away last April. In this episode, Erica shares a bit about their experience with his hospital stays, and we delve into their decision to switch him to comfort care and bring him home. We talk about her multifaceted grief for him and the ways that her faith has affected her journey with Wesley, both before and after he passed away. Erica and her husband, Sean, live with their 3 sons, Connor, who is 12, Liam, who is 10, and Harrison, who is 7. She is a healthcare project manager and is a lover of family and organizing. We are kindred spirits. All right, let's jump in. Hi, Erica. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to chat. And I would love if we could go ahead and get a brief overview of Wesley and a little bit about who he is, who he was.
Brief will be hard with him, as I'm sure with many people you talk to. So
Yeah.
I would say Wesley is our sweet surprise. From the moment we found out we were pregnant to the very end, everything about him has been just so sweet and always a surprise for him. So he had many conditions. So I'm not sure if it's easiest to go through kind of like where our journey has taken us, the diagnoses that he's had. So Wesley came into our lives very unexpectedly. We were done having children when we found out we were pregnant with the 4th. And because we sold all of our stuff, we wanted to find out what gender he was. So came in the tests because I was over 35. So I was able to get some more tests. And I did it just to find out the gender so that we could start stockpiling all the things that we got rid of.
Nice.
When that dreaded phone call came in the middle of my workday, where they told us that he would have Down syndrome. They were very confident he would have Down syndrome. And of course, they give you all of the options, which none of those were options for us. We just accepted that he has Down syndrome. And of course, then the laundry list of other things that can happen with kids with Down syndrome. Almost all of them with Wesley did happen. So at our 20-week ultrasound, we found out that he did in fact have a heart condition that would require a surgery. So we did the most prepping that we could, knowing that that would be the case with him. Came to birthday, he did fantastic. We had a very calm, very normal, typical birth, what you would call typical birth, nursed right away. And I was just like, we're going to be that family that other than the heart condition, nothing's going to be wrong. We're going to prove Down syndrome isn't a big deal. All of those things where you're just gung ho about it.
Yeah.
And about 30 minutes after he was born, the downward spiral of medical complications happened. He needed oxygen. He stopped nursing. And we sat in the NICU for 5 weeks because they could not get him off of, and many in the medical community get this, 0.1 oxygen flow. It wasn't even a liter of oxygen. It was 0.1. It was like a whiff of oxygen, and no one could figure out why he needed that. In that 5 weeks, we were transferred down to the bigger hospital, the bigger children's hospital. And that is when I got my introduction to how hospitals work, and understanding just the complexity there. So we did get to go home though. After 5 weeks in the NICU, we did get to go home. But what we found was that we were having other complications. Our big downward spiral happened shortly after that. He was home for about 2 months when, because of the complication that he had, which was fevering due to the medication, we were told to keep him home as long as we could keep the fever under control and under 103.
Oh, wow.
Which for most parents, like you're like 103, I would take him to the hospital. But they told us as long as he didn't have any other symptoms, it's just the risk outweigh the benefits. So keep him home.
Wow.
Because we're trying to prepare for open heart surgery and we needed to get him to that moment. We went to bed. He wasn't feeling all that great. Just the fever. So we held him all night long. And then we started getting a little worried because then he was starting to get a little bit lethargic. So we strapped him in. By the time we got to the hospital, his fever was 107.6.
Oh my gosh.
He did obviously make it through that next surgery, but he then had a stroke. So now we're bringing in more doctors, neurology. And then we found out after months of trying to figure out, because the continued fevering happened. He never stopped that whole fevering. So then of course we found out he had an endocrine deficiency. So they're putting on a whole bunch of meds for that. And we basically jumped right into this stay, not knowing one, if he would survive, and two, not knowing what life was going to look like. And I think that both of us kind of felt that, okay, well, if this is going to happen, then it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like we've had that feeling throughout our journey with him, is that in every moment throughout his journey, we know for a fact that we made the right decisions for him with the information that we had at that moment.
Right.
We don't have any regrets for any decisions we've ever made for him.
Wow.
Because we know that we asked all the right questions and we vetted as much as we could. And with what we knew was going on, it was the right decision for that moment. And we both always had that gut check feeling that we
Mm.
were always on the same page, which I'm very fortunate to have that in my spouse.
That's so cool that that confidence, like, kinda carried you through all the different, traumatic events where you could say, as his parents, we've done everything we can, and we're
Yeah,
gonna continue to do everything we can and just kinda guide him through this life, and, I think that's really beautiful.
thank you.
Mhm.
My planning, my lack of planning, maybe. No, my over
Mhm.
planning kind of kicked in
Mhm.
where I was like, okay, here's the plan. And I was coming up with the plan and I was like, okay, if we increase by X amount every day, then this is the date we can go home. And we're not
Mhm.
going to deviate from that process. And that is not how hospital life works.
Yeah.
Um, so we we were there for 455 days before Wesley came home. In that time,
Mm.
he had 3 open heart surgeries. He had
Mm.
sepsis 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
He hit 108.4 degrees
Oh my
where
gosh.
they said, say goodbye.
Yeah.
Um, he had gallbladder issues, which we're told only 0.1% of kids his age have gallbladder issues, need their gallbladder out. So all of those things compounded. And after we had been there, very shortly after 1 year from the day that we were admitted, he had his 3rd round of sepsis that knocked him so far down that they told us he would be comatose
Mm.
pretty much the rest of his life, that his new baseline was non-responsive. He would be completely dependent on us for everything.
Mm.
And that they didn't feel like he had a capacity for life.
Mm.
Um, we basically had to make a decision. What is life going to look like?
Yeah.
Um, they don't send kids home with arm pick lines. It's a
Mm.
standard practice because of such high risk of infection.
Mhm.
So basically, they just wanted to keep him there. And that was probably, I remember that day because
Mm.
we were on the ICU side and we had been pushing to get home. We made goals, of course,
Mhm.
for him. And our overarching goal was to just bring him home at
Mhm.
the end of the day, because before it had been for so long, we were like, we need to get him off of TPN. He needs to be on full feeds before we can bring him home. That was the goal. And that line kept getting moved.
Mm.
And all of these compounding things, this, the rareness of, having a TPN deficiency because of short gut, and then compounded the fact that his heart was not fixed. And then all of the rest of the issues that just come with
Mhm.
having Down syndrome, and then the stroke and everything. I remember that day walking in to a care conference. We had been scheduling care conferences every single month,
Mhm.
starting at about 2 months into the hospital stay. And during a care conference, for those people who may not know about those, it's where you actually get to have all the players in the room together,
Mm.
which is really rare to happen.
Yeah, a lot of
So, like,
schedules to coordinate, a lot of busy
yes,
people.
yes. So, we had been having these monthly care conferences.
Mm.
And I remember coming in with my book of questions, like I always had, and them basically saying, there are no other options. We've
Mm.
exhausted everything that we know. We've sent out second opinions to everywhere that we can. And we don't have any recommendations.
Oh,
And
man.
so we're not really sure what this looks like and what you guys even want for Wesley anymore.
Mm.
So Sean and I had to make the decision. What do we do? Like, what does this look like? We knew for a fact if we kept him in the hospital, he would die sooner rather than later. because just hospital life is hard.
Yeah.
And hospital life is life sucking
Yeah.
for a long time. It is.
Yeah.
It walking in there every day, seeing other people where you're like, okay, their day could be worse, but walking out of that care conference being like, I don't know if there's anybody who's having a worse day than us right now.
Yeah.
Having that feeling was completely helpless. And Sean and I both decided we're taking him home. It's about quality over quantity of life at this point.
Yeah.
And so we walked back into that hospital the next day and we're like, we're taking him home. You need to figure out how to make that happen. I don't care what the consequences are. We are taking him home. So figure it out. And for the next 2 months, we figured it out. All of August and all of September, we did everything that we could. We had to sign too many waivers that I can even remember. We had signed a DNR.
So DNR is do not resuscitate, right? Okay.
Correct. Because of everything he had been through, and he had coded several times in the hospital. We said we can't put him through that. And we don't want to see the downward spiral after that. We've brought him back to life so many times, and we know how hard of an uphill battle that is. And he had been through it so many times. And there was still so many hurdles that he had to go through that we said, we're done. We're going to take him home and we're going to figure it out. And I will say it was the best decision we ever made because he thrived when we got him home. He came to life. And, the transfer from hospital to home is a huge shift.
Yeah.
So you have this perception in your mind that, when we get home, things are going to be so much easier.
Yeah.
And I will say, you just switch out the hard stuff, because when you're in the hospital, we have that extra set of hands, doing a lot of the things, doing a lot of the care, doing a lot of the diapering and medications and making sure that everything's right. But when you get home, you're doing all of that stuff. But now you have the ease of being able to finally make your own decisions for your own kid.
Yeah.
For the first time, like I'm able to say, I think he looks a little bit fluid overloaded and I don't have to consult somebody to change his medication for that moment.
Yeah.
Or that overhead capacity of, oh my gosh, am I going to get a phone call at any moment that something's wrong?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like that moment where you just switch that.
Trading your hards.
Right. It was trading your hards. It really was. But the togetherness that you got finally being home and not having to drive to the hospital every single day. Because my husband and I were still working full time up until a few months before he came home. So we had both full-time jobs and 3 other boys in activities. And we learned very early on, a very wise friend that I met told me, Erica, remember, he is 1/6 of your family. So while he's requiring the most attention and need, you're still a family and he's still a part of that family and he needs to fit into the family. It's not all about Westley. It can feel like that. And yes, of course, you're going to do what you need to do for him. But at some point, you have to remember that your older kids are going to remember this and Westley never will. And that was a load of pressure off of me. The fact that I could be at home with my kids and I could enjoy going to a soccer game and not feeling guilty about not being at the hospital 24/7, because that's not what our family needed. And our boys remember us, being there for them throughout the entire journey. They remember us making time to have those family nights at the hospital. We would order pizza and get popcorn and we would have a movie. We would watch a movie in Wesley's room and we would all sit together and eat and have that. And normal,
Yeah.
typical family night. Yeah, it looked different for us, but we were there. Like the boys
Mm.
attended and were there and saw and participated in it. So they felt involved all the time. And like we were always this conducive family and not
Mm.
a disjointed one.
I love that. So, how many months was it from when you were able to bring Wesley home to when he did pass away?
So he made it a year and a half. So,
Wow.
yes. My husband and I, he had a couple of hospital stays just for colds and things.
Mm.
Um, and so it's funny because 2020 was our best year that we ever had. He
Wow.
had no hospitalizations. He had so much progress in so many areas. Sean and I made some decisions because of them indicating that he would be this comatose child who would not have progress going forward. And so
Mm.
Sean and I had made some decisions that we would start removing some medications that we didn't feel were necessary.
Mm.
One of those had a major side effect of this lethargy, and we didn't feel that he needed it. It was placed on him in a circumstance that was an extreme circumstance, and it
Mhm.
was left on by accident, I think.
Oh, man.
But we pushed and we said, we want him removed from this. And they said, if you remove him from this, he will probably have a stroke or seizures and pass away at home. And we said, well, we're willing to take that chance because at
Mm.
this point, we're already there. Like
Yeah.
you're already telling us he's palliative. So if we get to see more of Wesley, then that's what we're going to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
And within 3 weeks of weaning the medication, because it was like an 8-week wean,
Mhm.
he came alive. He started
Mm.
laughing and he started rolling over and he started having head control and he
Mm.
started interacting with our boys.
Oh my gosh.
And from then on, we couldn't stop him. He just completely thrived. And I look back on, I hate to say it this way, but the gift of COVID,
Mm. Yeah.
because if COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't have got to see as much of Wesley because I was working full time. My husband was working, the kids were always gone, and we were always busy with activities.
Mhm.
And the care of Wesley was becoming very hard
Mhm.
in those months. And when everything shut down, we got to just be a family finally because we
Mhm.
didn't get those opportunities to be a family for so long while he was in the hospital
Mhm.
that we got to be together every single day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a
Mhm.
week. I got to
Oh.
see him on my breaks from work. We didn't have activities packed in our schedule all the time.
Mm.
When we did go out, it was safe for Wesley to go out because so many other people were taking precautions that it
Yeah.
actually enabled us to actually enjoy things like the
Wow.
zoo. We could actually
Yeah.
enjoy the zoo because it wasn't crowded,
Yeah.
or because you had timed entry to
Yeah.
things and things felt safe.
Yeah.
Um, and so it gave us that perspective of we got so much time with him and got to enjoy so much time with him because the world shut down
Mhm.
that I'm so grateful that that his best year was that year that we got to actually fully enjoy him and have no regrets about like being too busy or that we didn't just spend time snuggling because that's what we did all the time when he was
Mm.
home.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
kind of funny that most people are like, oh, 2020 was terrible. And I'm like, 2020 was our best year that we had.
Oh, that's so sweet. And it's having a child with these medical complexities. I feel like it always like it changes your perspective. Like it gives you this really like I think a mature perspective where, a lot of people were complaining about, man, I'm like, I can't stand my family. Like I'm with them all the time. And maybe there, there probably was a little bit of that because every family feels
Yeah.
that way. But I think it's just so neat to be like, well, if you know your child has a limited life, especially like you don't take that stuff for granted. Like being together as a family was so meaningful to you. And I think that's really, really beautiful. I think that's really
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. It's funny because I look back now and yeah, I see that as a huge gift.
Mm,
Because I always was that, okay, we've now checked this box. What's next on the list of things that
yeah.
he needs to progress? After my spouse beating me over the head so many times with slow down, it'll be
Yeah.
fine, like
Mhm.
take your time. Um, I think I never, so as a caregiver, you hear a lot of people say, I could never do what you're doing,
Mhm.
or I could never handle that. And until
Yeah.
you're in the middle of, like, I had no choice.
Right.
I just dealt with it. But on the other hand, I don't think that as a caregiver, we give ourselves enough credit for everything we're actually doing.
Absolutely.
Because I will say that until Wesley passed away, I didn't realize how much I was doing until
Mm.
it wasn't there to do anymore. The mental exhaustion that I didn't realize I had, the mental overhead of just, well, what's going to come next? Or, oh my gosh, I have to remember to schedule that refill and then I have to pick it
Mm.
up. Or, oh, we need to make sure that those supplies, just like all that overhead capacity. And then all of the doing,
Mm.
all of the things that you used to do that were just habit of, getting that feed ready or getting the TPN mixed,
Mm.
or, all of G-tube care and then the bath and, just all the
Yeah.
stuff that you do as a caregiver. You don't realize how much you're doing and how much it actually has an impact on you
Mhm.
until suddenly it's not there.
Yeah.
Giving yourself credit for all of that, like, we are amazing. I hate to say it.
Yes.
The
Amen.
medically complex kids are like, the parents are amazing that do that. And of course, we do it
Mm.
selflessly and we're going to do it.
Mm.
But just acknowledging that you are doing it on a day to day basis and how much strength that takes to just pick it up is astonishing.
Yes. No, I totally agree. And I think, because I do hear a lot of parents saying things like, oh, well, people say, I don't know how you'd ever do that. But then, like, well, you would do the same thing, which is absolutely true. But that doesn't take away from the gravity of it all. Like you're saying, like, it's just as astounding and astonishing what we can handle or we have to handle and what we are able to do when you love someone like that amount, that unconditional love for a child. Um, I wonder, what is your grief like? I imagine it's pretty complex where you might feel this sense of relief, even like of all the cares, all the worry, like everything that you were doing, but also missing him so much. Like what has your grief been like?
Yeah. So it's interesting because you're right. I'm a very logical person, analytical person. And
Mm,
so I tend to look at logistics. Like,
mhm,
of course I'm sad.
mhm,
Of course I'd love to snuggle him every day. But I know, one, we did everything that we could for him and he had the
mhm,
most awesome life. But two, I realize how much more we now have to give to our other kids,
mm,
that because we were dealing with Wesley all the time, they were having to grow up a lot
mhm,
sooner than they probably needed to. And our youngest does have some social issues that I feel attributed to a lot. I mean, he was 4 when Wes was born.
Oh,
So
wow.
he's only known hospital life. He's only known all this medical technology and all this medical
Mhm.
equipment. And so being able to address that now because Wesley's not here. I know it sounds like strange to say it like that. We're able to give the kids the attention
Mhm.
that we need. And I don't want it to come off like our they loved him and
Mhm.
they have their own grief that they're going through. But knowing how busy our lives are now, because all the code restrictions have now lifted and we are busy all the time. I don't know how I would have been able to handle everything I was handling
Mhm.
while doing all of the stuff I'm doing. I just
Yeah.
I look at it now and say, how did I do that?
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I guess of course it's very sad that Wesley's not here. But yes, there's absolutely a sense of relief
Mhm.
that he doesn't have to go through all of these medical appointments, all of these medicines being pushed in his body, that our kids aren't having to watch all of
Mhm.
that happen, that my conversations with my spouse don't revolve around medications and what is the next step.
Yeah.
Um, and that life isn't circulated around these medical complexities. You
Yes.
know, the first thing that we did when Wesley passed, it it wasn't even 12 hours. I threw every single medication of his away. I got rid of it all
Oh.
because I was
Mhm.
like, that's the things that stressed me out.
Yeah.
And those are the things I didn't want to see. I didn't
Mhm.
want to see the feed bags and the gait trainer and the stander and the like all of the medical stuff. We got
Mhm.
rid of the oxygen within 3 days of him passing because
Mhm.
that was all the stuff that stressed us out
Mhm.
because I wanted to be able to hold on to all the stuff that made us happy and
Yeah.
all the stuff that he accomplished and
Mhm.
overcame. So being able to separate his medical stresses from his person has
Mhm.
been probably the biggest sense of relief in my grief, at least,
Hmm.
because those are the things like the relief was the medical stuff has gone.
Yeah.
The medical complexities are gone and the medical overhead is gone. But then it's just that typical grief of my child.
Yeah.
And I will say, as far as our personal situation, other people have lost kids. I have a full time job. So I was able to kind of dive back in and at least control something in my
Mm.
life.
Yeah.
And I know
Yeah.
you've talked about it in other podcasts,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was like as a project manager in my job, like I was able to dive into controlling something, timeline to something, putting my check marks to something every day,
Mhm.
and being able to dive back into our kids' lives and just having those outlets. And we had other kids that we
Mhm.
just had to keep going for.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things. It's a weird feeling because when he came home, right before he came home after that long hospital stay, we had actually already planned his funeral.
Oh, wow.
So having to have a conversation with your spouse on, well, do you want to be cremated or buried? And
Mhm.
where do you want it to be done at? Because we were having to make those decisions for us so that we could make the right decisions for Wesley. Because if we
Mm.
were going to be buried, then we needed to get 3 plots.
Yeah.
Like it's those compounding things that you never think that you're going to have to make. And because we knew when it happened, we wanted to be the ones there for our kids. We
Yeah.
didn't want to be shoving them off on somebody else during the process, we wanted to be in the thick of it, to be the ones answering all of the boys' questions
Mm.
throughout the entire process. And we're
Yeah.
very grateful that we were able to do that after his passing,
Mm.
because we were able to just lay in bed with the kids and answer our 7-year-olds typical grief questions of answering the
Mm.
same question over and over and
Mhm.
over again, because that's how they understand grief.
Yeah.
So the main thing is just you're able to separate the medical grief and that relief
Mhm.
to the person. That has a big difference, and being able to
Yeah.
understand and feel okay with grieving for him and my sadness,
Mhm.
but being okay with the relief that comes from the overhead.
That makes so much sense because you're right. I think that the way you categorize that is very logical. And I think that would be a good way to, because I was thinking about it, I was like, man, I think I would feel relieved in, a sense, like you were talking about, but then maybe feel this guilt for feeling relieved. So I love how you're able to like separate the two and be like, no, it makes sense. It totally makes sense that I feel relieved of of the burden of the medical care, but I miss my son. And I
Yeah.
in your Instagram, I loved that post you talked about where Wesley is now and and where you believe he is now. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that and like how your faith has helped you through this as well.
Yeah. So I know no one wants to hear it in the middle of things. When you're in the depth of like being tired and overwhelmed in the hospital, and someone comes and tells you there's a reason for everything, it's not helpful.
Right.
It's not helpful to be told that. However, I knew deep down that there was a reason, and
Mm.
that I knew that God had a plan for whatever was happening, and that there were going to be good that happened out of it. And I
Mm.
had no clue what that would look like. And I did not feel it at all during the process of,
Mm.
well, what is that good? No clue. But I just had this overwhelming sense of peace that it would reveal itself one day, whether here or in heaven. It would make
Mm.
sense to me on why everything happened the way it did. Um, and
Mm.
throughout the process, I mean, of course, your emotions get to you. And there are times throughout the hospitalizations that, of course, I second guessed whether or not I was the right parent, or that
Mm.
I could handle it, or that we were making the right decision. But as soon as I thought that, I immediately had that peace afterwards. Like, no, no,
Mm.
Erica, that's not the case. There's something good going to happen out of this. Nothing happens to you without a reason. And
Mm.
I kind of had that hope and faith that one day I would figure it out. And I had heard something one time from a friend that there are more days in eternity that I'll get with Wesley
Mm.
than I have on the earth. So, I'm going to get more than 3 years in eternity with Wesley.
Mm.
And so this was just the introduction to
Mm.
that journey that I get with him, because of my faith in Jesus and because of what Jesus has done for me. I get to enjoy that forever
Mm.
with Wesley. And that overwhelming peace that Wesley knew nothing but love his entire life.
Mm.
There was not one day that he wasn't, that he was loved. And there was not one day where he didn't radiate this sweet brightness or light out of him, even
Mm.
in the middle of sepsis, or even in the middle of feeling terrible, where you and I would be we would not be having what was going on to
There'd
us.
be no glow.
Right. There would be no glow. And to see him have this charisma, even without being able to speak, have this instant charisma to draw people in and to him who had never met him, just through, social media posts or things like that, to hear that not only I felt that, but that so many other people did, is a testimony to not only him, but part of his purpose in life is to radiate that faith and that there is more to life than what culture tells us there is.
I love that. Because, a lot of times that mentality of like, oh, don't judge my child's quality of life just because it looks differently than yours. That is said, quite often by parents. But to hear that even in death, even Wesley passed away, and yet he still is an example that there's more to him and more to life than just what he lived. And I think that's so awesome. I really love that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Erica, for, being really vulnerable and sharing your journey and Wesley with us, and just, the nitty gritty and the awesome and all of it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You can find adorable photos of Erica and her family on the website, therarelifepodcast.com. You can also find Erica and me on Instagram, and links for those accounts are in the show notes, as well as a link to the episode we referenced, episode 53, Diagnosis Jealousy. There's also a link to her website with the extended hospital stay notebook she created if you want to get a head start in looking into that. Join us next week as Erica gives her top 3 pieces of advice for hospital stays. She is a wealth of information. Don't miss it. See you then.